Dr. Senka Holzer today with us, and I will give you a short intro about her rich profile actually. Dr. Senka has a Ph.D. in molecular medicine. Her study about disconnection from our values can impact our hearts won McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School Research Award. She leads a research unit on heart signaling at the Department of Cardiology of Medical University of Graz and enjoys sharing her work on values with her students, friends, professional coaches, leaders, and total strangers sitting next to her on a plane. Her approach is to combine newest findings in the field of well-being, preventive medicine, stress research, and positive psychology with years of experience in professional coaching in order to develop innovative, dynamic, and evidence-based coaching tools and programs. This session aims at helping you establish the science-backed framework for coaching that will ensure your clients are getting the maximum of their coaching experience. Welcome, Dr. Senka, and please go on.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank everyone for joining us in this session where I'm going to talk about my favorite topics, combining research and coaching. So I'm greeting you all from Graz, Austria, and I wish you a good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, whatever time zone you are at. And I'll start with slide sharing. Maybe you just give me a quick feedback if you can see my slides now in the full screen mode. Fantastic. So thank you very much. So as introduced, I'm going to talk about well-being research and how we can use everything that has been discovered in the last years and decades as the framework for a breakthrough coaching experience. Here is a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about, and after the very brief introduction where we will discuss this idea whether we should connect research and whether we should bother with all the neuroscience and whether we should know all those details when we do coaching, yes or no. And then the whole talk will be divided in 3 different parts. So first we will talk about what do we really need to thrive. So what is our coaching goal? And I'm going to share some highlights from the well-being research, some amazing science of life values, and then we'll go to the part 2 and discuss why those concepts that we so heartedly believe that they're going to work, why they don't really work as well as we expected. And I'm going to introduce 3 different concepts that we discovered in our research that could serve as an explanation how we can enhance the current research and also enhance the coaching practice. And then how we can use all of that to create a framework for really breakthrough coaching. And just at the beginning, I have to say that during the discussion, some parts of the presentation will also present my personal opinion. As you see, as I have a brain, I'm probably a little biased when I talk about my own research and experience in coaching. So this is just a very brief introduction to understand my background so that you know where I'm coming from and why am I so passionate about bringing coaching and research together to go hand in hand. As you already heard, I was born and raised and studied, completed my bachelor and master studies in biochemistry at the University of Novi Sad in Serbia. Then I moved to Graz, Austria to pursue my Ph.D. in molecular medicine. And right after graduation, I was awarded a fantastic fellowship, national fellowship that allowed me to study abroad and for enhancing and improving my knowledge in heart physiology and pathophysiology. I chose University of California, Davis, where I spent 2 fantastic years doing my junior postdoc. At the same time, I became increasingly interested in professional coaching, both because I was really fascinated by this mind and body connection, but also because I was aware that once I go back to Austria, I will have more and more responsibilities and I will need more and more coaching skills and better communication skills. So I completed the professional coaching for life and work at University of California, Davis. When I moved back, I started my own research unit at the Medical University of Graz. We're looking at the molecular basis of the development of heart failure. But coaching influenced me so profoundly that I'm also in parallel doing a lot of workshops, career workshops, where where I'm trying to implement this, what I learned in coaching, and change the academic climate. So I'm working with PhD students and early career researchers, how we can become more, nurture more coaching atmosphere rather than a very competitive academic one to make better progress. So now, just a quick introduction, well-being research and coaching, yes and no. So I was a sort of thinking, I'm not sure whether this is the right approach. So let's see, is it maybe better to really have this open-ended approach that I really, really loved when I finished my coaching education, which says the client supposed to lead the way because they know absolutely the best, what is the best for them. I was really fascinated by this coaching approach and how just by asking questions and active listening and direct communication, you can help them find their own way, your clients. But then at the same time, I was aware of a lot of well-being research that was going on in the background. So there were years and decades of research that showed what do we actually need to have and to find this deep fulfillment in our lives. And I was always thinking whether maybe the better approach would be, again, to let the client lead the way and show us that they know what is best for them, but somehow having in mind what years and decades of research showed what we really need in order to try and make the best results for ourselves. And I tried to combine everything I learned in coaching and in my research and create something that is really approachable and understandable, intuitive for everyone, and that it doesn't take years to learn, but somehow to create this framework that we can follow for a really, really unique coaching experience. And before I start with our concepts and sharing some previously shown concepts, I just want to make sure that we're all at the same page when we talk about well-being. So what is well-being? How do we measure it? Why is it important? And what influences our well-being? In scientific work and literature, it's defined as a self-report of how satisfied we feel with our life in general, and how much positive and negative emotions are we experiencing. So I like to say in a very simple language is when you're sitting in front of the mirror, how do you feel your life is working for you in general? And one of the most common way how we measure well-being is so-called satisfaction with life scale. It's a very simple tool. It's developed in 1985 and it has a scale ranging from 1 to 7 and 5 sentences. And to be able to assess your well-being, you would read those 5 sentences. So I'm just going to briefly go through them. In most ways, my life is close to my ideal. The conditions of my life are excellent. I'm satisfied with my life. So far, I have gotten the important things I want in life. If I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. And then your task would be to look at the scale and say, if you strongly agree with each statement, you would give yourself a 7. If you completely or strongly disagree, you would give yourself 1. And maybe you would be somewhere in this range between the two extremes. And then you would rank for each of those statements, you would connect it with how you feel on this scale about it. The next part would be to sum up all your score for the 5 sentences. And if you're in this higher range, between 30 and 35 points in total, you could say that you're a really highly satisfied person. In the opposite, or if you're towards the bottom of this range with 5 to 14 points, we would say that there is some problems with satisfaction with life. And this is really important because this well-being will determine many things in our life. And if we think about work, it would be related to the high levels of well-being are related with better performance, higher motivation for work, less sick leaves, lower turnover, and so on. And the opposite is true. The opposite is true for lower levels of well-being, which are associated with low productivity, decreased engagement, more sick leaves, higher turnover rates, and even burnout and depression rates. And then, of course, the question is, can we change, and how can we change our levels of well-being? And if we look at this first question, can we change our levels of well-being? I think the best and most complete answer that you will find is in this book written by Professor Sonja Lyubomirsky, The How of Happiness, where her short version of her answer is, yes, we can, but up to our set point. And what Professor Lyubomirsky meant with that is that there are parts of our well-being or happiness that are changeable and parts that are not. What she found out in years of her research is that our well-being levels and happiness depend 50% of our genetics. And good or bad part of that, depending on which kind of happiness and well-being genes we have, is that we cannot control this part. But then I was really surprised to learn something, and that's that our circumstances, which I believe are very, very important, whether we're healthy or not, whether our financial situation is good or not, whether we have a degree or not, whether we are in a relationship or not, account only for 10% of our well-being. And a big portion, a big part of this pie of our well-being depends on our internal state of mind and the intentional activity that we are doing on a daily basis. And this is where coaching comes into play. This is something that we can increase and enhance for our clients through a great coaching experience. So what do we need to thrive? What are the elements of well-being? There has been a lot of research done, and I'm just going to show you some highlights, but if you're interested, you can anytime reach out and I'll provide you with more references and more great reading resources that can help you understand these elements of the well-being, and also some studies that will illustrate this in a very practical ways. So there are three key elements that are crucial for fostering well-being. The first one would be feeling self-directed. The second one, feeling competent. And the third one, feeling connected. And this is called 3 basic psychological needs. Those 3 needs are the basis for the theory of self-determination, which is a fantastic theory which describes and differentiates what humans, what all of us, depending where we are coming from, which age we are, what we really need to thrive in our lives. And they define those 3 needs. Autonomy as the need to determine the course of one's own actions in life and act in harmony with own interests and values. Competence would be the need to feel effective and contribute to the greater good and the welfare of society and of others. And relatedness, the need to feel deep connection and attachment to other people. And then there is something really important to distinguish needs from our wants and wishes and intentions and so on, is that irrespective of what we personally believe about those needs, or we believe that this theory is right or wrong, the satisfaction of those 3 things will bring us the higher levels of well-being. In contrast to when those 3 needs are not satisfied, either we believe in them or not, they will influence our well-being in a detrimental way. The authors of this theory Ryan and Daisy describe it in a similar way as, for example, vitamin C. So whatever you think about vitamin C, that it's important, crucial or not, its deprivation is going to lead to scurvy. And this is the same with those basic psychological needs. And the other thing is, this is why this theory is called the self-determination theory, because when those three needs are satisfied, they're releasing our superpower, our intrinsic motivation, our self-determination to do great things in life. And now the next big question is, how do we satisfy those basic psychological needs? Because in ideal world, just hearing, oh, we have those needs would immediately mean that we can tomorrow do something about them and bring more well-being into our lives. But I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides that the situation is a little bit more complicated than that. So there is a connection between our needs and values and behaviors, what I like to call the cause and effect relationship between those elements that ultimately determines our levels of well-being. And I always like to represent it in form of this apple tree, analogy of the apple tree, which I call the tree of life. And I'm going to show you how this works, how this interaction works. So in the basis of this tree, the root of this tree are our three basic needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And we have a natural human tendency, just because we're human, we have the tendency to satisfy our three basic psychological needs. And then the situation gets a little bit complicated. So we strive to meet those needs by acting on the values that we believe are important for feeling autonomous, related, and competent. And the thing is, what makes each of us unique is that we all have a different blueprint of our own values. So the way how we search our need, for example, for competence, to satisfy our need for competence, will be very different. I'll pick different values than you or your brother or a person with your same name that lives in the other part, on the other part of the world. And then the purpose of those values and of our value system is to help us choose between different behaviors that on a daily basis, which supposed to serve the satisfaction of our values, through which we will satisfy our basic need. And if there is one thing that you will take away from this webinar, please make it this idea of how our needs and values and behaviors are connected. And when they work, all three, when they are aligned and work together, what we have is this nice blooming tree that bears a lot of fruits. We have a good level of well-being. And because life values represent such a crucial part of this whole theory, and they connect our needs with our behaviors, I want to zoom in now and share a little bit more in details the science of those life values. So when we talk about them, the first person and the first work that we have to mention is Milton Rokeach, and his work of human values, I dare to call him the father of human values, taught us two key lessons about the values. Lesson number one is that virtually every decision, no matter how big or small, starting from whom to marry, right down to which toothpaste to buy, is rooted in a value we hold and our beliefs around that value. And the lesson number two is that if we want to make a deep-rooted change in behavior, so to change behavior for better, to serve us better, it requires to re-evaluate our value system, find the consistencies and inconsistencies with the system, and try to align our actions and our values. And this has been described in the late 70s. A lot of this work has been done in the early 70s. And from this research, a conventional coaching practice emerged. I'm sure that you already tried this exercise, that you may even use it with your clients. And it's a really worthy one. So I'm just briefly going to describe how it works. First, you would get a list of values. There are so many different lists of values freely available on the internet. You can find them in many different books. And then you would have your client research this list, try out all different words, see what the gut feeling is saying, and they would pick top 10 values, which for them represent what is the most important to do well in life. The next step then would be to rank order those values from 1 to 10 and see which are the most important and the most influential values for this person. Then the client together with you would create an action plan where the whole idea would be to find spots and slots where you can introduce activities that are rooted in these values to bring more of those values to your life, which should result in improved levels of well-being. So this was the theory, but the practice showed that this doesn't really work on the long run as we expected. And now I'm going to introduce some challenges. Why do we think, how we recognize that this approach is not working on a long run as we wanted? So the challenge number one is that we're not always walking the talk. And to illustrate this example, I can share with you many different examples after this one and some of our own research, but I find this study from the Harvard researchers as really one of the best examples how we are not walking the talk and how what we say is important can be shifted out of our focus. So those researchers recruited families with children, and then they asked questions. They had a set of questions for parents and then a similar set of questions for their kids. So the questions for parents, one of them was, what is most important for you? For one, your kid achieving at high level, your kid feeling good most of the time, or the third alternative was your kid having a caring character. And then the questions for kids were tweaked just a little bit. So what is most important for your parents? You achieving at high level, you feeling good most of the time, or you having a caring character? And the result of these questions and interviews was really surprising, because 96% of parents said, we want caring kids. They said that developing caring moral character is their absolute top parenting priority. And then the kids said, well, that's not what I heard. 81% of kids thought that top goal of their parents is their personal success. So there must be some force that makes parents say one thing, but then in reality behave a little different and convey a different message to their kids. The challenge number two would be that we don't stick to the plan. And a really good way to illustrate this, that even if we have the smartest goal set, we don't stick necessarily to the plan on a long run. And the great example for this is the research around New Year's resolutions. So the statistic and the research says that approximately 50% of population makes New Year's resolutions. The first 2 weeks in January usually go along beautifully. We hit the gym, we do whatever with our nutrition, we're really sticking to the plan. But then by February, people start to backslide. By July, less than 50% of people stick with their resolutions. By December, around 90% of people are back exactly where they started, if not worse. And that means that 88% of all set resolutions fail. So just in the US, it would be 150 million failed resolutions every year. And the challenge number three is that our values seems to change over time more than we can predict. There is a fantastic study, and there is also a TED Talk that describes the study in a very visual way. And I highly recommend that you reach out and look for it. It's called The End of History Illusion, but I call it The End of Change Illusion just because I think it's more easier to understand this message. So what does the end of change illusion means? It means that no matter our age, we always underestimate how much our values are going to change in the future. So let's look at this example. Let's say this was a 20 or 18-year-old individual who was asked to assess. So the first question was to assess how much your values changed in the last 10 years. And then the next question was to how much do you think your values will change in the next coming 10 years? And then this person would say, my values changed tremendously in the last 10 years, and they will not change much in the future. And this was true no matter the age of the participants. So ranging from age 18 to age 68, everyone underestimated how much their values are going to change in the next 10 years, which means that life values change over time more than we predict, which have us making decisions that our future selves are regretting. So this, after learning all those evidence, it was obvious for me that we need to get more details about these values and understand them in a better and closer way so that we can really exploit and how we can change the behavior by looking at our values. And we came up with 3 different concepts that could explain this why don't we thrive. So the first is the rhetoric-reality gap, core versus acquired values, and expectation-reality gap. So when we talk about rhetoric-reality gap, this is exactly what was described in this first study when the pairs of parents and kids were interviewed. We call this rhetoric-reality gap the difference between what we say is most important to us and then the difference between how we act in reality. So what we did, we went, I connected with my research to the coaching community, and we developed tools that could actually measure the discrepancy between our stated values, so what we say is the most important, and the values that actually drive our behavior, decisions, actions, and priorities. So we call them driving values. And this is the result of our first experiment. We find that 95% of participants at our study reported that they have a difference, specific degree of difference between the top 5 stated and top 5 driving values. So if you look at this diagram here and these different bars in different colors, 0 would mean that none of the top 5 stated values, so what we say is the most important, matched our driving values. And then 100% would mean that everything we say is perfectly reflected in our behavior. As you can see, the majority of people find them somewhere in between. So there is a specific overlap between what we say, what is important, and then what we do in reality. And then we start asking, what could be this force that can shift our focus from what we say is so important for us? And then whole our theory about the organization of our value system came into the play. We discovered that we have 2 different sets of values, of which one is strongly supported by various social factors. And this is how we like to visually represent them. The first group of values would be our core values, our innate and inherent values, which are then surrounded by layers of what we call acquired values. And now we're going to zoom into the differences between core and acquired values and how we can use this knowledge for a better coaching experience. So let's first see how did we get those 2 different sets of values, because I'm a really molecular person and I hold a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology. This is how I saw it immediately when we started this, differentiating between these 2 different sets of values. I could say core values are sort of our psychological DNA. This is what we are. We are born with this, as we are born with our physical DNA, which then determines different characteristics of how we look and how flexible our joints are and so on, our psychological DNA would be a profile of how we go about satisfying our 3 basic psychological needs. And if you here imagine those, instead of genes for eye color or height or whatever, as your psychological genes, what do you need to feel connected? What do you need to feel autonomous? This is how I imagine these core values is working. This is something you were born with. And then we have those acquired values, which are coming from the outer world. And I used to represent them as the little virus, which is having his own genetic material. He's fusing with our system, with our DNA. It's incorporating its own information into our DNA. And once those values are mixed, we cannot recognize our original files anymore. And the reason why this is happening is because this acquiring values process is happening at such an early age, when we don't have neither knowledge nor experience to know what our core values are. And then we end up with completely mixed files, which we cannot sort out anymore, except by deep reflecting, which is going to be the topic of the next couple of slides. So where do we acquire values? Where those acquired values come from? The first layer of acquired values would be our microenvironment. This is the most intimate and the most effective way how we acquire our values, from our close family and friends. And here I just collected some of the examples of our clients which reported what would be the advice they got from their parents or guardians that stick with them the most throughout the life. And here are some examples. If you fail in school, you won't be able to get a job. Choose a profession that will make you rich. Or the typical one, boys don't cry. It's really everywhere in our society and modern culture. Just try to be as other kids. Or men don't like women who are too smart. Or the worst that can happen is you get a divorce. And now imagine if you're on a receiving end of these advices, your value system will be definitely influenced by this. Let's say this boys don't cry. If you hear that all the time, then toughness and strength will be the values that will be supported by your environment. And that doesn't necessarily have to match your own values. The second layer would be the generational values, which would come from our school friends, teachers, media, and now among younger generations, the most dominant, the social media. So here I made just put together some pictures that are from the so-called influencers of young generations in today's world. And if you look at the messages they're having, it's of course not surprising that those new generations are obsessed with money and fame and materialistic world and so on and so on. And then the last, the most other layer of acquired values are the cultural and national values, which we are absorbing in our history classes, national symbols, stories, prominent manuscripts, and so on. So really, depending in which part of the world we are born and raised, our value system will be highly affected. And now, one thing that I really want you to remember and understand is that those acquired values start with really good intentions. So our microenvironment, our family and close friends, they definitely want to protect us. They want to offer what's the best for us. Our generation is there to make us feel understood, to inspire us. National and cultural values are there to make us feel safe and to have a sense of belonging. But they can cause different problems. They can create conflicts. For example, if you encounter a person from different generation or a different culture, there are well-documented conflicts. They could be misunderstood. They could be completely misleading. They could be out of date. But the most important and the most detrimental effect that they can have is that they can detach people from their true selves. Because if we focus too much on our acquired values, just by the fact that we have only 24 hours in a day, will make us spend less time and energy on what truly matters to us, on our core values. And this is something that we actually measured, and we could show that too much focus on our acquired values can decrease our well-being. This is what we measure in this study. So here on the Y scale, you see this score from the satisfaction with life scale experiment that I showed you in the beginning. It ranges from 1 to 7, and you can see that there is a negative correlation with how much focus, so the relative centeredness, on our acquired values. So the more we are focused on our acquired values, let's say 100%, the lower levels of well-being. And the opposite is true. If we are not focused on our acquired values at all, but live in alignment with our core values, our well-being has higher levels. And I like to represent that, go back again to the tree of life and present what does this mean. So if our behaviors align with our core values and help us satisfy our basic needs, we are thriving, we are bearing apples. But if our behaviors predominantly support our acquired values, we might satisfy some of our basic needs. We might feel competent for moments. We might create some relationships, but we won't have this rich feeling of deep satisfaction and fulfillment, and overall our well-being will suffer. Why is this happening? So one of the explanations for this effect is the expectation-reality gap, and this is what it is. So we have, depending on all those 3 layers and sources of acquired values, when they promote their values, they promise a reward. Let's say, if you do great in school, you'll be happy in life. If you always show toughness, you'll be well respected by your colleagues, and so on and so on. So they always come with a specific promise of a reward, which raises our expectations how those values will then influence our life and our reality. But then what happens is that this rich feeling of satisfaction is missing, and this is what we call expectation-reality gap. So those acquired values, which are based on persistent voices of our surrounding that promise good and happy life if we do some things and avoid other things, very often do not bring us the same level of happiness as they are promised. And now, because I have 2 small kids, and this is something really relevant to my life now, I'm going to show you how it looks like in my life now. So this is what we expect that we get, and this is inevitably the result that we get when we try to make these nice baby photos that we see in the internet. So why do we have this expectation-reality gap? We studied that also in more details. There are 2 things that we want to mention when we talk about acquired values. So events that are rooted in our acquired values give us only intense but short-lived spikes of happiness and satisfaction. As you can see here in this diagram, let's say something great happened that satisfied one of our acquired values, and we experience this boost of energy and satisfaction, but it quickly fades away. The effect goes back to the original levels very fast. And we call the life based on acquired values, life of peaks and values. And then opposite to that, when we do things that are in alignment with our core values, we have a total different situation. These core values give us lasting satisfaction. The positive effects accumulate over time. It doesn't necessarily have to be that strong, but it does accumulate over time. And there is a very short exercise how you can test that, how you can feel this long-lasting effect of the core values. So let's say, try to remember something that you really wanted to buy 10 years ago, whatever it be, a designer's bag or a book or whatever that you really wanted, and or a house or a boat or whatever. And how does that feel 10 years later? We can barely recall this great feeling that we had at the moment that when we maybe bought this thing. But then in contrast to that, if you remember things that were rooted in your core values, let's say you helped someone who was really in need 10 years ago, and if you or did something or said something that really changed and helped this person create better life for themselves, when you remember this at this moment, it will still give you this feeling of satisfaction and great feeling that you did something that was rooted in your core values. So this is this long-term cumulative effect of your core values. So what can we do? This is, of course, the most important question for us. We can do, of course, coaching. This is the summary of everything, coaching, of course. And just to show you quick some results from our study, we showed that this effect where we really intensively talk about value system and help people create awareness around their value systems, that we can make amazing results. So if you look here, first conclusion was that we can help people orient away from their acquired values and more towards their core values. So here we have the control group. This is the baseline levels of how much focus they had in their acquired values. And then there was a random intervention where we talked with people around different areas of lives, but nothing specific about value. So their relative centeredness, how much time and effort they dedicate to their acquired values, did not change over time. But when we help people design 3-session coaching that is really helping people understand this connection between needs and values and behavior, and then differentiate between 2 different sets of values, they can completely orient away and decrease by almost 10% how much time and effort and dedication is there for their acquired values. And most importantly, this could affect also our levels of well-being. So if you look here, this was the baseline of 2 different groups, control and the coaching group on this, again, on this scale, satisfaction with life scale. And if you look at the control group, which had the control intervention that was not value-based, we have no change in the well-being. But then when we have the coaching group, we have an increase in the well-being, which could stay even 1 month after the coaching session was terminated. It actually increased from the after the session 3 to 1 month follow-up. And I didn't show you this data because they are not yet published. This was published at this Harvard conference, but the other data are not published. We made also follow-up for 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months after the coaching, and we could show that the levels of well-being actually stayed at these higher values all this time. And as a general message to you, what is for me my top coaching goal, and which I want really to spread this idea, is to create the culture of awareness around first our needs, values, behavior connection, and then specifically the awareness around 2 different sets of values. And how do I do that? I do that in 3 different steps. So first step would be to notice the core and acquired value. And I really love this picture because it one-to-one represents how do I feel about the interaction between our core and our acquired values. So our core values are always there, always peaceful, always waiting for us to come back to them. And our acquired values have this little mind chatter or advocate or this little angry chihuahua that is always reminding us on those shoulds, what we should do, what is the right way, what is the acceptable way, what people expect from us, and so on. And it's very loud and persistent. And that's how it grabs our attention, not because it's more essential to us, but because it's so loud and aggressive, and all those shoulds are incorporated in its voice. And then the second step would be to increase the awareness space. So whenever we get an input from the outside world, or whenever we are noticing, I'm feeling great or I'm feeling sad, whenever we have some reaction to something that's happening outside of us, we should stop, make a break, increase the awareness space, and reflect. What of our core value was in play? What of our acquired values were in play? So reflect and increase the space between the input, the trigger, and our reaction to it. And in the third step, learn to consciously navigate. So I would never say remove all of your acquired values, stop acting in according. No, but just be aware. And when you dedicate your time to your acquired value, do that consciously and know when to switch from one path to the other, and know what that brings to your life and how that enhances your overall well-being. Because switching between these two different sets of value consciously will make you own will make you own the decision when to act in accordance to your core and acquired values, and navigate, unfold your life exactly as you want it to be. And when I present this, all this data and all this research, I get very different feedback. And I'm just hoping that whichever group of your feedback and how you feel about this information you are, that there was still something that you can take from this webinar and incorporate in your coaching practice in the future. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to take on some questions and discuss. I noticed that we have some in chat, so maybe we can go and check the questions. Thank you again.
Dr. Senka, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. We have, let me just read the questions which we have. The first one, how can we differentiate between our core and acquired values?
Sure, this is my favorite and then the best questions of all questions. So it's difficult, it's challenging, I have to say. We acquire those values over really long time, sometimes even decades, and sometimes they're imprinted in our brains on such a fundamental level that it's really hard to bring them to our awareness. And so there is a lot of resources. I do invite you to contact me via the CTA's LinkedIn page and ask me for the resources that I can check. There are blogs that we wrote, that there are many information that I personally wrote. There are many research studies that can help you identify what are the right questions to ask your clients. And I'll be really happy to share that with you. And we also have a course that can help you this process, but we can discuss that then after the session. I would love that in 45 minutes I can give you all this knowledge, but this is a process. Our experience says that people need somewhere between a month and 6 months to understand their whole value system. And that's why I think coaching is a perfect tool to get there.
Thank you, Dr. Senka. And the second question is, where do core values come from?
Also great question. So this is a matter of debate. I cannot say for sure because it's really hard to have a proof that it's all genetically and that we're born with them. But the reason why we strongly believe this is the case is because when we really, with our clients, when we really made a long-scale study and large-scale study, we noticed that people talk about these core values the same way, they use the same language as they use, for example, for describing the personality traits. This comes naturally to me. This is who I am. This is what I have been always. This is the only way I can imagine myself reacting. This is what I'm naturally driven to. So this is how I would say indirectly we connect that to the same type of information as our personality traits. So that's why we believe. And that is very opposing to the acquired value, because even when our surrounding is completely against our core values, we tend to stick to them. Just think about it. So this is something we cannot leave behind and not be.
Thank you, Dr. Senka. And the next question is, how are you differentiating between values and beliefs?
Also great question. Thank you for this one. So I would say these two are inseparable, and in all our training and studies, we always say that there are two aspects of values that we have to understand to have a clear picture, an X-ray view on our value system. The first one is what our values are, and then the second one is what our belief around this value is. And we can really not separate that. This is the whole program that we got. This is your value, and this is what is going to happen to you if you pursue this value versus if you don't pursue this value. And it comes as a package, value and a belief around that.
Thank you, Dr. Senka. And then the next question is, are we all born with the right core values? How can we trust those?
Interesting and philosophical one. So I had a discussion with many psychologists along the way since I started this study. And there is a belief, yes, we are all born with the right ones. They're right for us. And the only thing that is not studied, and we would have to make a study, is when we have like an obvious psychological disorder or personality disorder, and then go and check those values. This is something beyond the research that we did. So I cannot go into that. I always talk only about things that we know for sure, and I share our data there when I can stand behind them. But this is the area that we didn't study, and would definitely be interesting to find out the core values of people with obvious or documented personality disorders.
Okay, and this question is about actually, so as we know this kind of knowledge which we have in this presentation about values and how children acquire values from the childhood, the question is how to act with our kids in regards of all this knowledge.
One of really relevant questions for me now, because I'm living that at the moment. So I have a 2.5 and 4.5 old, and I'm trying to be really aware of this whole process of acquired values. So one parenting tip, if I dare to say, would be observe. Try to see what their core values are. Core values is not something that we will try to follow on one occasion. Core value is not something that we can easily leave behind. They will always go back and repeat the activities that are rooted in those core values. They will start conversations that are engaged with their core values, and your idea is your task is to observe and try to make connections between those observations and see what is the common denominator in the things that they like and they prefer to talk about. And so, but I say in 25 years I can give you the result of my experiment, so how that privately worked for me.
Thank you, Dr. Senka. I think that was interesting presentation and a deep work in values, which we are as coaches very interested in that. So are there any other questions to Dr. Senka before we finish? We still have a few minutes.
Maybe if there are no questions, I might want to give you 2 tips for like practical questions. So if we have time, what would be my #1 tip, how to understand the acquired values of this first layer, the microenvironment? So that for me, this question would be, what is the parenting advice that stick most with you? It's really a tip that can, asking this question can uncover so much information around the acquired values that were nurtured in one's family. It's really a golden question to start understanding the familiar value in this very intimate circle. And for example, if you try to think about the needs and the values and behaviors connection and try to understand that better, let's say we take the need for relatedness, and you want to understand what values are important for this need for relatedness for your client. One really great question that you can ask is to try to find the common thing all your best relationships in your life have in common versus what is missing in those where you are just acquainted and cannot go over this phase of becoming really close. And then you will see that some patterns are popping out and that they're probably rooted in the core values that you need to find this really deep connection.
And I received one more question with where to find further information about that, Dr. Senka.
Yeah, so I was told that my profile is featured at the CTA LinkedIn page, and then you can connect directly from there with me, and I'll provide you with references and information where you can get further readings or further trainings and whatever your needs are.
Thank you so much. Still, we have very few minutes.
I see one comment. Someone asked me to repeat the second question about the relationship, I guess that was. So the idea was that when you are looking at the connection between needs, values, and behaviors, you would pick one need and ask someone to think, for example, in relationship, to think top 5 relationships that you have. What is the common denominator? What is in common for those 5? And what is missing in those that are not your best relationships? And then you will find the patterns that would correspond to the values.
That sounds powerful, Dr. Senka.
Thank you.
No, actually, thank you so much, Dr. Senka, for this valuable information and deep information about values. Thank you so much for the whole presentation and for answering these questions. And we have really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for a great moderation and introduction. And thank you all for your comments and for your time and dedication to learn about the coaching process and go out and be the best coaches that you can be. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to the great community.
Thank you for everyone also has attended this presentation. Wish you all the best.
Thank you.